She married a poor circus performer, unaware he was the millionaire who owned the whole show. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The circus tent shimmered beneath the evening lights, stripes of red and gold rippling in the warm breeze. Lila Jones pulled the frayed hem of her costume tighter around her wrist, the faint scent of sawdust and popcorn filling the air. The crowd inside roared with laughter, unaware that the woman waiting behind the curtain was fighting for her future. Her mother's medical bills were months overdue, and the circus manager had warned her that this would be her last performance if she could not prove she had stable residency papers. As the drums rolled, a shadow appeared beside her. Eli Mason, the quiet performer who worked the ropes and lights, stood holding his black hat in both hands. His voice was low, calm, almost too steady. "Lila, I have an idea. Marry me." She blinked, thinking she had misheard him. "What?" "It would not be real," he continued. "Just a legal formality. I need to fix a paperwork issue for my contract, and you need a stable address for your mother's insurance renewal. We can help each other." Lila stared, her heart pounding louder than the music from inside the tent. "That is crazy. I barely know you." Eli gave a faint smile. "Think of it as a contract. 6 months. No strings attached." The spotlight spilled through the curtain, a wave of cheers following. Lila exhaled shakily, her mind spinning. She wanted to laugh it off, but desperation left no room for pride. "And after 6 months?" she asked. "You walk away," he said simply. "Debt-free. Paperwork cleared." The brass band hit its final note. Lila looked down at the silver ring Eli had slipped off his finger. It was dull, scratched, and far too big for her. But something about it, its worn edges, its quiet weight, felt honest. She closed her fingers around it. "Fine. 6 months. But this stays business." Eli nodded once. Agreed. Moments later, they stepped into the ring, bathed in light and applause. The crowd thought they were partners only for the act, a daring dance on the high wire. But beneath the glitter and the smoke, two strangers had just signed an invisible contract that would change both their lives forever. Lila lifted her chin as the drums thundered again, her heart racing beneath the sequins. For now, it was only pretend until the moment the world would discover that the poor circus performer she had just married was not poor at all. That night, the carnival lights went out one by one, leaving the field bathed in pale moonlight and the faint hum of generators cooling down. Lila walked back to her trailer, her boots crunching through gravel, her fingers still curled around the silver ring Eli had given her. The circus had gone quiet except for the distant bark of dogs and the rustle of canvas flaps swaying in the wind. Inside her small trailer, the wallpaper was peeling, and the air smelled faintly of rust and medicine. Her mother lay asleep on the narrow bed, her breath shallow, a soft wheeze in every exhale. Lila sat beside her, brushing a strand of gray hair from her face. The bottle of pills on the table was almost empty. Tomorrow, the hospital would call again. Tomorrow, she would have to explain again that the payment was coming soon. Her chest tightened. She had been saying, "soon," for months. Lila pulled out the crumpled envelope that held her last paycheck. $40 in cash, not even enough for a week of medication. She stared at the silver ring again, tracing the dull scratches along its surface. Somewhere outside, she heard Eli's voice laughing with the stagehands. He seemed at ease, confident, like a man who had nothing to lose. Why would someone like him offer marriage to a stranger? The thought circled in her head all night, restless and sharp. Maybe it was kindness. Maybe pity. Maybe he was just desperate too. She could not decide which possibility hurt more. The next morning, the manager, Mr. Cobb, stood at the door of her trailer, his hat tilted low, his tone colder than usual. "Lila, the city inspector will be here next week. Without a legal address, you are off the roster." She forced a smile, though her stomach sank. "Please, I just need a few more days." I have already given you weeks, he said, glancing at the worn shoes by the step. You are talented, but talent does not pay the insurance office. When he left, she sank to the ground, hands trembling. She thought of her mother, the hospital, the pills, and the way the circus had always been her only home. By dusk, she found herself walking toward Eli's wagon. He was sitting outside tuning an old guitar, the melody low and patient. When he saw her, he set it aside, eyes calm as ever. You came. She hesitated, voice barely above a whisper. If I say yes, what happens next? Eli rose slowly, the lantern beside him casting gold light on his face. We go to the courthouse in the morning. Sign the papers. I will handle the fees. You keep your job, your mother keeps her insurance, and no one in the circus has to know. Lila looked at him carefully. You make it sound simple. It is not, he said, his expression unreadable. But it is honest in its own way. The wind carried the faint tune of his guitar, and for a moment she imagined what it would be like to stop fighting, just for one night. To stop running from bills, from fear, from the feeling of being invisible. She nodded slowly. All right, I will do it. Eli smiled faintly, not triumphant, not surprised, just quietly relieved. Then tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, meet me by the old Ferris wheel. As she walked back to her trailer, the moon hung low over the field. The silver ring caught its light. And for the first time in months, Lila felt something she had almost forgotten. Not joy, not hope. Something smaller, more fragile, like the whisper of a chance. The next morning broke gray and heavy with clouds. The carnival grounds were still wet from a midnight drizzle, the scent of damp hay and metal filling the air. Lila stood by the old Ferris wheel, her coat buttoned tight, the silver ring looped on a chain around her neck. She had not slept. Every hour of the night, she had imagined walking away, but she was still there, waiting. Eli arrived exactly on time, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee that steamed in the chill air. He handed one to her without a word. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly damp, as though he had already been working. Lila watched him, still unsure what to think of the man who had offered her marriage like a business deal. Are you ready? He asked softly. She nodded. As ready as I will ever be. They rode in silence to the courthouse in a dusty pickup truck that rattled with every turn. The city stretched ahead of them, gray buildings flashing through the fog. When they arrived, the clerk at the marriage counter barely looked up, pushing a stack of papers toward them. Sign here, both of you, she said. Lila held the pen, her hand shaking slightly. Eli's signature flowed easily, confident and practiced. When she finished hers, he turned to her with a calm smile. That is it, he said quietly. You are Mrs. Mason now. The words felt strange in her ears, almost foreign. She glanced at the simple silver band he slid onto her finger. It was the same one from the night before, only now it had meaning beyond pretend. Afterward, Eli suggested breakfast at a diner across the street. The smell of butter and coffee filled the small room. Lila sat opposite him, the paperwork tucked safely in her bag. She stirred her cup absent-mindedly. You really do not have to pay for me, she said. Eli's tone was gentle. It is all part of the arrangement. Consider it a signing bonus. She smiled faintly, though she did not understand him. For a moment, she caught him studying her the way people look at something they recognize but cannot name. When they returned to the circus grounds, the day had already grown bright. Mr. Cobb greeted them near the gate, his eyes darting to the ring on Lila's hand. Married, are you? He said, raising a brow. Lila managed a steady voice. Yes, it happened this morning. He gave a short laugh. Good for you, girl. Maybe it will calm you down and make you focus. He clapped Eli on the shoulder before walking off. Inside the tent, the performers were setting up for the evening show. Eli handed her a folded sheet of paper. This is our agreement, he said. 5 rules. No one outside this camp needs to know. We do not share a room. We do not interfere in each other's work. We keep it professional. We end it in 6 months with no questions asked. Lila read each line carefully. And the 5th rule? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Do not fall in love. She felt a small, nervous laugh escape her. I think I can manage that. Eli smiled faintly and offered his hand. Then we have a deal. The handshake was firm, brief, but something in his gaze lingered a quiet flicker that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. That night, as the lights of the circus flared to life, Lila stood in her costume, the silver ring glinting beneath the stage lights. From the shadows, she could see Eli watching her. Their act had not even begun, and yet something about the air between them already felt like a secret too real to keep. Days passed, folding into weeks, and the strange rhythm of their secret marriage began to settle like dust on an old stage. Lila and Eli performed together every night, their act a breathtaking dance of balance and trust. The high wire glittered under the golden lights as she stepped onto it, her hands trembling until she felt his steady grip. Beneath the roar of applause, their eyes met just long enough to remind her why she could do this at all. Outside the tent, life carried on as though nothing had changed. To the rest of the crew, they were partners only for the act. Lila still lived in her small trailer beside her mother's, and Eli kept his quarters near the lighting rigs. But he always seemed to appear at just the right moment, fixing a broken strap, handing her water, adjusting her harness before she climbed. His quiet care made the world feel a little less cruel. One afternoon, a heavy rainstorm trapped the performers inside the main tent. Lila sat on a crate polishing her shoes when Eli approached carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. The air smelled of wet canvas and sawdust. He handed her a mug and sat beside her. "You should rest," he said. "Your shoulder has not healed." "I cannot rest," she replied. "If I miss even one show, Mr. Cobb will replace me. You know how he is." "Oh." Eli studied her for a moment. "You think the world will fall apart if you stop for a single night." She smiled faintly. "It usually does." He looked away, running a hand through his damp hair. "You are stubborn, Lila Jones. And you are mysterious, Eli Mason." She shot back, but the teasing melted into silence. For a moment, the rain was the only sound between them. When the storm finally eased, he stood and offered his hand. "Come, I want to show you something." "Oh." He led her to the storage wagon where the props were kept. Hidden behind crates was an old trapeze bar, polished and unused. Eli brushed the dust from its metal frame. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "She was a flyer before me. She used to say that every performance was a promise you give people something to believe in, even when your own heart is breaking." Lila traced the edge of the bar with her fingertips. "Did she die here?" He nodded once. "During a show, the rigging snapped. I was 16. Her throat tightened." "I am sorry." He smiled faintly, a tired kind of smile that reached only halfway to his eyes. "That is why I still perform. Not for fame, not for applause. For her." She looked at him, the dim lantern light catching the raindrops still clinging to his hair. "You never told anyone that." "I never needed to," he said. "Until now." The words hung in the air between them, warm and fragile. Lila felt her chest tighten with something she could not name. She wanted to thank him, to reach out, but before she could, a stagehand called from outside that rehearsal was beginning. They returned to the main tent, the smell of wet earth rising from the ground. As she climbed the ladder to the platform, Lila's heart pounded harder than usual. Below her, Eli stood waiting, his hands open, ready to catch her if she slipped. That night, when the crowd erupted in applause, she realized that somewhere between the rules and the performances, she had stopped pretending. Something real had begun to take shape in the spaces where they dared not speak. The circus season reached its peak, and the crowds grew larger with every passing week. Posters with Lila and Eli's faces were pinned across town, calling them the Sky Dancers. Every night, the tent filled with families, the air thick with the smell of roasted peanuts, caramel, and sawdust. When the drums rolled and the spotlight cut through the smoke, they stepped onto the wire together, and the crowd held its breath. From the outside, it looked like perfect harmony, but inside Lila's mind, the balance was fragile. She kept reminding herself that this was a contract, nothing more. Yet every time she saw Eli waiting below, eyes steady, arms open, she felt her heart tilt closer to the edge. After one of their best performances yet, the crew celebrated around a fire pit behind the tents. Someone handed out bottles of soda, the band played offbeat tunes, and the laughter felt light for the first time in weeks. Lila sat beside her mother, who was wrapped in a shawl, cheeks pink from the warmth. Eli arrived carrying a plate of food for her, the steam rising into the night air. "You should eat," he said. You burned more energy tonight than everyone else combined. Lila smiled, her voice soft. You watched too closely, Eli Mason. He sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. That is my job, to make sure you never fall. His words lingered longer than she expected. She wanted to say something back, something that matched the quiet promise behind his tone, but a group of reporters approached before she could speak. One of them, a woman with a notepad and a bright red jacket, smiled. The Sky Dancers, right? We are doing a feature story on rising circus acts. Can we ask a few questions? Eli's face hardened, polite but distant. Of course, he said, but no personal questions. The interview started well, questions about training, teamwork, favorite acts. Then the reporter asked, Are the two of you together off stage as well? The chemistry between you looks very real. Lila froze. The contract rules echoed in her head. No one can know. No feelings involved. No lies that go too deep. She laughed nervously. We are just partners on the wire. Eli's jaw tightened, but he nodded, backing her answer. The reporter smiled knowingly and scribbled notes before leaving. After the crew dispersed, the fire burned low. Lila stayed behind, watching the embers fade. Eli stood nearby, his face half hidden in shadow. You handled that well, he said quietly. She shrugged. We have rules. I followed them. He looked at her for a long moment, his voice low. Sometimes rules are easier to write than to keep. Before she could answer, he walked away, the sound of his boots fading into the night. Later, lying awake in her trailer, Lila stared at the ceiling. The faint sound of the Ferris wheel creaked in the distance. She turned the silver ring on her finger again and again, feeling its cool weight press against her skin. For months, she had thought she was acting, performing a role for survival. But now, every smile, every touch on the high wire, every look Eli gave her, it all felt too real. When dawn came, she opened the small trunk under her bed and pulled out the folded contract. 5 rules, written in black ink, still clear despite the creases. Her eyes lingered on the last line. Do not fall in love. She whispered into the still air. Too late. Outside, the first sunlight hit the tent, setting the red fabric glowing like fire. And somewhere beyond it, Eli Mason was already awake, tuning his guitar, unaware that the quiet line between truth and pretense had finally disappeared. The next morning, the circus was already buzzing with the sound of trucks, ropes, and laughter. A television crew was coming to film their act for the first time. It was the biggest opportunity the circus had ever had, and Mr. Cobb walked around barking orders with a whistle around his neck. The bright banners flapped in the wind, and the smell of new paint filled the air. Lila tried to focus on her stretches, but her mind was miles away. Every word from the night before echoed in her head. She had broken the final rule, the one that was supposed to protect them both. It had not been sudden. It had been slow, like rain soaking into the earth, until it was impossible to tell when it had begun. Eli was already at the platform, testing the wire, checking the lights. His focus was absolute, as if nothing else existed. When their eyes met, he gave her a nod that was polite, distant, professional. It hurt more than anger ever could. During rehearsal, she slipped. It was only a minor stumble, a half-step wrong, but Eli reached for her so fast that even the safety crew gasped. His hand caught her wrist firmly, holding her steady. The entire tent went silent. She looked down at him, the same calm eyes. But there was something else there, a storm he was hiding too well. After rehearsal, he followed her outside, away from the noise. They stopped behind the animal pens, the air heavy with the scent of hay and rain. Lila, he said quietly, about last night, about how things are. She cut him off, voice trembling. You do not have to explain. We both knew the rules. He looked down, his jaw tightening. I made those rules because I knew what would happen if we broke them. And what exactly is happening, Eli? She asked, her voice sharper now. Because I cannot tell if you are protecting me or pushing me away. He hesitated, then said softly, maybe both. The honesty in his tone disarmed her. She wanted to be angry, but all she felt was tired, tired of pretending, tired of fighting what was already true. Before she could respond, a voice shouted across the lot. Mr. Cobb was waving frantically. Mason! Jones! The investors are here. You are up in 20 minutes. Eli turned back to her. "We will talk after the show," he said. She nodded, though she knew words were useless now. When the show began, the audience was enormous, hundreds of faces glowing under the lights. The television cameras glided across the stands. Lila climbed the ladder slowly, every step echoing in her chest. Eli stood on the opposite platform, his expression calm, unreadable. The music swelled, the spotlight cut through the air, and together they stepped onto the wire. Every movement was practiced, graceful, perfect. Yet beneath the rhythm, something had changed. The space between them hummed with unspoken truth. Halfway through the routine, as she leaned forward for the midair catch, she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, fear for her. His grip was strong, steady, but his jaw clenched as if he wanted to say something and could not. When the performance ended, the tent erupted in applause. The crowd rose to their feet, chanting their names. Lila smiled for the cameras, but her heart was pounding too fast, her throat tight with everything unsaid. Later, when the lights dimmed and the cameras were packed away, she found Eli sitting alone behind the bleachers, staring at the darkened tent. She sat beside him without a word. For a long moment, they said nothing. The night breeze stirred the dust around their feet. Finally, he spoke, voice low. "When I look at you up there, I forget who I am supposed to be." Lila turned toward him. "Then maybe it is time you tell me who you really are." "Who?" He did not answer, but his silence was heavy with something that sounded like the beginning of truth. The following week, tension spread through the circus like smoke after a fire. The newspaper had published an article about the Sky Dancers, complete with photographs and speculation about their relationship. The headline read, "Love on the High Wire. Are the circus stars married in secret?" Mr. Cobb was furious. He stormed into the practice tent, waving the paper in the air. Who talked to them? Who told them this nonsense? His voice echoed across the empty seats. Everyone looked away, pretending to be busy. When his glare landed on Lila, her stomach turned cold. "You think I did this?" she asked quietly. "I do not know," he snapped. "But now the investors want answers. They do not fund scandals. Either this story dies, or one of you leaves." Eli stepped between them, calm but firm. "She did not do this. I will handle it." Mr. Cobb scoffed. "You had better, or both of you will be out before the next show." He tossed the paper onto a crate and left. Lila picked it up. The photo showed her and Eli mid-performance, his hand on her back, their eyes locked. To anyone else, it looked like love. To her, it looked like the truth she had been trying to hide. That night, she found Eli sitting outside his trailer, his hat pulled low, a half-finished letter beside him. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He looked up slowly. "There is a meeting tomorrow morning. Investors, the press, Cobb. They want me to speak." "Speak about what?" "About us," he said simply. "And about who I really am." Her heart jumped. "Eli, what are you talking about?" He sighed, the sound heavy. "I did not mean for you to find out this way. I own this circus, Lila. My father built it decades ago, under a different name. I took over after he passed. But I wanted to rebuild it from the ground up to see what it was worth when no one knew the Mason name." Lila stared at him, stunned. "You mean, you are the owner? All this time?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Cobb thinks he is in charge. But I have been funding everything behind the scenes. The performers, the equipment, even your mother's insurance. I did not want gratitude. I wanted honesty. I wanted to know if this place still meant something." She stepped back, the weight of his words crashing into her. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You let me believe you were like me, broke, desperate, fighting to survive." "I never meant to hurt you," he said quickly. "But I needed to understand the people who worked here. I needed to know who I could trust." Her voice trembled with anger. "So, our marriage? That was part of your experiment?" "No," he said firmly. "That was real, at least for me." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You had every chance to tell me the truth. You watched me beg for work, watched me worry about rent, watched me sell my paintings for coins, and you said nothing." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Lila, please, do not," she said sharply. "Do not call my name like you deserve to." The lantern beside them flickered, casting long shadows over the dirt. Neither of them moved. The silence between them felt wider than the wire they walked each night. Finally, she whispered, "Tomorrow, tell them whatever you want, but after that, I am gone." Eli's voice was quiet, almost broken. "You will not even let me explain?" She turned away, her tears catching the moonlight. "You already did." Then she walked off into the darkness, leaving him alone with the sound of the wind and the echo of everything he had tried to keep hidden. The next morning, the circus grounds were unusually quiet. The Ferris wheel stood still, its colors muted by the gray light of dawn. Lila had not slept. Her packed bag sat by the door of her trailer, the silver ring still resting on the table. She had decided to leave after the morning meeting. Whatever the truth was, she could not bear to be part of a world built on lies. At 8 o'clock, the performers gathered in the big tent. The investors sat in a neat row of folding chairs, their suits sharp and expressions sharper. Mr. Cobb stood beside them, eager to defend his reputation. Reporters held cameras and notebooks, the air thick with anticipation. Eli walked in last. He looked composed, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. Lila watched from the shadows near the side curtain, her heart pounding. She wanted to hate him, but a part of her still waited for him to say something that would make it all make sense. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady. "Thank you all for coming. There have been rumors about ownership, about relationships, about the truth of this circus. Today, I want to set everything straight." A murmur ran through the crowd. Eli paused, scanning the faces in front of him. "My name is Eli Warren Mason," he said clearly. "This circus was founded by my father, Daniel Mason. After his death, I rebuilt it under a new name to understand whether the heart of this place was still alive without the Mason legacy attached to it. It was never about deceit, it was about rediscovery." Gasps filled the tent. Mr. Cobb's face drained of color. One of the investors stood up. "Are you saying you are the owner?" "Yes," Eli replied. "I am the owner, and I am responsible for every person who has worked here." The reporters scribbled furiously, the clicking of cameras echoing off the canvas walls. Lila stepped back into the shadows, her throat tight. Eli continued, his tone softening. "There is one more truth I need to share. Months ago, I entered into a marriage contract with one of our performers, Miss Lila Jones. It began as a practical solution, but it became something far greater than I expected." The crowd whispered again. Mr. Cobb nearly dropped his clipboard. Eli looked toward the side of the tent, finding Lila in the dim light. "I never meant to deceive her. I kept my identity secret because I wanted to be seen for who I was. Not for the money I had, but in doing so, I hurt the only person who ever believed in me without knowing who I was." He turned back to the audience. "If this circus has taught me anything, it is that real courage is not walking the wire. It is telling the truth when it costs you everything. So here it is. This place, this company, this life, it belongs as much to her as it does to me. From today forward, I am transferring half the ownership of this circus to Lila Jones." Gasps filled the tent again. Cameras flashed. Lila froze, unable to breathe. Eli's eyes never left hers. This circus will now be called the Mason and Jones Traveling Show, because she gave it back its heart. The crowd erupted in applause. Mr. Cobb's mouth hung open, speechless. Lila felt her chest tighten. Every part of her wanted to run, but her feet would not move. Tears burned her eyes, not just from shock, but from the quiet truth in his voice. When the applause died down, Eli set the microphone aside and began to walk toward her. The cameras turned, following him as he crossed the sawdust floor. He stopped a few feet away, his voice barely above a whisper. "You told me once that every performance is a promise. This is mine." Lila stared at him, trembling. "Why would you do this?" "Because you reminded me what this place was meant to be," he said softly. "And because I am done hiding." The crowd waited in silence. The only sound was the low creak of the ropes above. Lila's tears finally fell, her anger melting into something she did not yet understand. For the first time in months, the circus felt alive again. The applause slowly faded into a hush as everyone waited to see what Lila would do. She stood frozen near the edge of the ring, her hands trembling, her mind caught between disbelief and the ache of everything that had come before. Eli stood only a few feet away, the lights washing over him, his face open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence inside the tent felt heavier than the air before a storm. Then Lila finally found her voice. "You think you can fix everything with money?" Eli shook his head gently. "No, I am not buying forgiveness, Lila. I am giving back what should have been shared all along. You helped me see the circus not as a business, but as a home. You showed me that legacy means nothing without love." She wanted to stay angry, to remind herself of every lie, every secret, every sleepless night. But the look in his eyes, honest, raw, almost pleading, unraveled her resolve. He had never looked like a man with power. He looked like a man afraid of losing, the only thing that made him human. Slowly, she walked toward him. The crowd held its breath. She stopped just close enough to see the reflection of the lights in his eyes. "You could have told me the truth," she said quietly. "I know," he answered. "And if I could go back, I would. But the truth is, you believed in me before you knew who I was. No one else ever did." Her chest ached. She looked around at the tent, the red fabric glowing like fire, the performers peeking from behind the curtains, the audience waiting for a fairy tale ending they did not understand. Then she looked back at him. "You said every performance is a promise, so keep yours." He smiled faintly, a tear slipping down his cheek. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he knelt in the sawdust. "Lila Jones," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "This time, no contracts, no rules, no secrets. Just me. Will you stay and make this life real with me?" The crowd gasped, but Lila did not hear them. She was looking at the same silver ring he had given her months ago, now polished to a soft glow. For the first time, it looked like it belonged. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Yes." The tent erupted in applause. Performers cheered, children clapped, and somewhere in the back, her mother wiped away a tear. Eli stood and pulled her into an embrace as the band struck up a joyful tune. The cameras captured it all, the laughter, the music, the confetti that rained from above. Weeks later, a new sign was hung above the entrance of the big tent. "The Mason and Jones Traveling Show." The words shimmered gold against the crimson canvas. Underneath, a smaller line read, "Founded on trust, restored by love." The circus thrived like never before. Crowds came from miles away, not just to see the stunts, but to witness the story that had become legend, the poor circus performer and the woman who married him, only to discover he was the man who owned the show. Every night, before stepping onto the wire, Lila touched the ring around her neck, now gleaming under the lights. Eli would take her hand, steady as always, and whisper the same words he had said the night of their first real performance. "Do not look down. Just look at me." And as they climbed into the glow of the spotlight, the audience saw two people suspended above the world, not for money, not for fame, but for the promise that love, once real, never falls. When the final curtain dropped, and the music softened into silence, Eli looked at her with a smile that said everything words could not. Lila smiled back, her heart finally steady. The show went on, but for them, it was never just an act anymore. It was the life they had built together, balanced, fearless, and forever real.